Before anything else, a warning is in order. What follows may feel intense, sharp, and a little uncomfortable. Viewer discretion is advised because although this is entertainment, it's also a collision of personalities. One built on rapid-fire quips, the other on deliberate calm. What happens, truly, when a television host known for quick comebacks, pointed interruptions, and an almost aggressive need to dominate the conversation encounters a Southern senator who moves through dialogue with quiet intention? A man who speaks slowly, not because he lacks answers, but because he measures every word for impact. A guest who understands that the most powerful voice in the room is often the one that doesn't need to raise itself. This isn't the typical clash of ideology you see on talk shows. It's what occurs when someone who confuses volume with validity meets someone who knows that certainty doesn't require shouting. A host used to maintaining control through interruption suddenly faces a man who refuses to be hurried, refuses to be rattled, and refuses to be maneuvered into looking foolish for the sake of entertainment. And that man is Senator John Kennedy. With his Southern drawl, easy manner, and unhurried speech, Kennedy has long been underestimated. What many forget is that beneath the folksy charm lies one of Washington's sharpest legal minds, someone who can dismantle an opponent's argument piece by piece without ever changing his expression. His conversational rhythm is intentional, his pauses purposeful, and his words chosen with surgical precision. The View invited him expecting what they often see from political guests: defensive fluster, visible discomfort, or explosive irritation. Something juicy enough to clip, share, and replay online. Joy Behar, in particular, stepped into the interview armed with a strategy. The plan was straightforward: mock his intelligence, portray his Southern cadence as an act, and imply his deliberate speech was a cover for lacking depth. In her mind, this was tough questioning. But there's a difference between questioning and condescension, between probing someone's political positions and simply trying to belittle them. And what Joy failed to realize is that the latter rarely lands well on someone who has spent decades debating prosecutors, judges, and political adversaries far more prepared than any talk show host. Kennedy knew exactly what was happening from the moment he sat down. While Joy saw him as an easy target, a man she assumed she could outpace with speed alone, he remained unbothered. People who equate quick speech with sharp thought often misunderstand those who choose slowness on purpose. Kennedy's pauses weren't signs of hesitation. They were moments of calculation, each giving his words more weight when he finally delivered them. Instead of being thrown off, he became the calm eye of the storm while Joy escalated, mistaking her rising energy for rising effectiveness. She had zingers lined up. She had jokes ready. She had decided in advance that he would be the punchline. But mockery is not insight, and quickness is not clarity. One by one, Kennedy dismantled her assumptions, not with aggression, not with theatrics, but by remaining centered. His confidence wasn't performative. His intelligence didn't need speed to prove itself. And his refusal to rush only magnified the contrast between her frantic attempts at dominance and his steady, unshakable presence. By the time the exchange began to shift, the tension in the studio had become noticeable. The audience sensed it. The panel sensed it. Joy sensed it. This wasn't going the way she had planned. When she introduced him with a smirk and the line, "Our next guest is a man who mistakes headlines for heroism," the crowd chuckled on cue. But beneath the laughter was a subtle awareness. This might not end with the easy victory she expected. Because sometimes the person speaking slowly isn't lagging behind. Sometimes they're simply giving everyone else time to realize how far ahead they already are.
"Please welcome Senator John Kennedy," Joy announced, her voice carrying that familiar mix of showmanship and simmering intent. Kennedy stepped onto the set with a steady, unhurried pace, not slow, not sluggish, but deliberate. Each movement felt measured, as though he refused to let the energy of the room dictate his rhythm. To the untrained eye, he might have seemed overly cautious. To anyone paying attention, it was clear he simply moved with purpose. He offered a single nod to the audience, another to the panel, and then settled into his chair without any of the nervous fidgeting or forced charisma most politicians brought to daytime television. There was no grand smile, no attempt to immediately charm. His quiet confidence communicated more than any rehearsed performance could have. Joy crossed her legs, papers neatly arranged, leaning forward just enough to project casual engagement. But beneath that posture was an unmistakable sharpness, a readiness to pounce cloaked in curiosity. "So, Senator," she began, voice dipped in sugar but sharpened at the edges, "do you believe your humor hides a lack of depth?" The question dropped like a stone in still water. It wasn't about policy, legislative work, or public service. It was an immediate swipe at his intelligence, a challenge to the persona he carried. The audience reacted with a blend of amusement and unease, sensing the jab for what it was, an opening blow meant to unsettle. Kennedy didn't flinch. He didn't shift in his seat or offer even the slightest sign that he had been stung. When he finally spoke, his southern drawl wrapped around the words with a smoothness that disguised steel beneath. "If depth means drowning in nonsense, I'll stay shallow. Thank you." The laughter that erupted wasn't the polite, manufactured kind talk shows often coax out. It was real, unexpected, and immediate. The audience recognized a clean hit, a response delivered so calmly it amplified the sting. For a split second, Joy's smile faltered before she forced it back into place. She had thrown her first punch, expecting him to stumble. Instead, he'd turned it into a commentary on the question itself, neutralizing it with ease. She glanced at her notes as if searching for her footing, but the silence Kennedy held between them had weight. It lingered, unsettling in its steadiness. "You've got an answer for everything, don't you?" she said with a tight chuckle, then added, dripping sweetness, "I guess that works better when no one's fact-checking." It was an accusation disguised as wit. Kennedy leaned back slightly, looking more relaxed than ever. "Oh, I'm sure they will. The trick is saying something true enough to survive the check." A ripple of applause and murmured approval moved through the crowd. Something about this exchange felt different. Kennedy wasn't posturing, he wasn't defensive or irritated. His calm responses only made Joy's escalating aggression feel more conspicuous. Joy forced a wider smile, clearly trying to regain control of the room. "Well," she said brightly, "this is going to be fun." "That depends, ma'am," Kennedy replied, voice soft but cutting. "Are we talking fun for the truth or for the ratings?" This time, the laughter surged, louder and more energized. Joy hadn't expected him to call out the game she was playing. Not so openly, not so effortlessly. But he had, and the audience knew it. The shift in the room was unmistakable. Joy leaned forward, her patience thinning. The professional smile she wore at the top of the segment had hardened into something sharper. "You mock colleagues, you turn pain into punchlines. Is that leadership or just laziness dressed up as charm?" The studio went quiet. The kind of quiet where small sounds grow loud. The rustle of papers, the hum of the cameras, the faint movement of someone's bracelet. Kennedy didn't tense or bristle. His expression held the same composed steadiness as before. He took a slow breath, leaned in toward the microphone, and spoke with deliberate calm. "If the truth hurts, maybe it's not my joke that's cruel. Maybe it's your comfort that's fragile." The words were silk over steel, gentle in tone, devastating in effect. The room felt it instantly. The audience reacted before Joy could even form a response, half gasping at the audacity of Kennedy's remark, half applauding the precision of his counterstrike.
Even one of the co-hosts shifted uncomfortably in her seat, biting back a smile as if she knew she probably shouldn't be amused by how neatly Kennedy had turned Joy's accusation into a reflection of her own defensiveness. Joy blinked hard, jaw tightening as she registered that she had been outmaneuvered yet again. "Oh, that's cute," she said quickly, forcing a laugh that ended far short of her eyes. "You practiced that one in the mirror?" It was another attempt to diminish him, to imply his responses were scripted rather than sincere. But Kennedy had an answer ready, one that would tilt the entire atmosphere of the studio. He tilted his head a fraction, a quiet, knowing smile brushing his lips. Not smug, just deliberate. "No, ma'am," he replied calmly. "You invited me for a circus. Sorry if I brought a mirror instead." The crowd erupted. Some laughed openly, some cheered, a few booed in loyalty to Joy, but every single person in the studio was glued to the stage. Something extraordinary was happening. A political guest not merely surviving Joy Behar's signature aggression, but methodically dismantling it with unnerving composure. For a heartbeat, Joy froze. It was the kind of pause you don't plan and can't conceal. The shock of realizing a segment you'd designed to dominate has spun out of your control. The camera caught everything. The flash of real frustration, the tightening of her lips, the flicker in her eyes as it dawned on her that Kennedy had seized the momentum. 3 seconds stretched into what felt like 3 minutes. Tension thickened the air as the audience waited to see how she'd recover. Kennedy didn't follow up with gloating or cruelty. He simply sat back, hands folded loosely, radiating a calm certainty that made Joy's struggle even more pronounced. Somewhere in the control room, producers were surely panicking. But inside the studio, only one truth mattered. The power dynamic had shifted completely. Joy Behar, known for her quick jabs and relentless wit, had underestimated her guest, and the audience knew it. Joy straightened abruptly, trying to reclaim the ground she'd lost. Her voice sharpened as she abandoned the thin facade of politeness. "So now you're the savior of truth?" she said with open sarcasm. "Please, you twist words better than most twist lies." The audience let out a collective, charged ooh, recognizing another blow and anticipating the counter. Kennedy didn't flinch. He didn't blink. He simply met her stare, a small, calm smile rising again. "Funny. I thought twisting words was the network's job." Gasps and laughter burst across the room. Even Whoopi paused, eyebrows lifting as if unsure whether she should intervene or simply let the confrontation burn. Joy blinked rapidly, thrown off balance by the boldness of calling out the network on its own stage. She forced a brittled chuckle, leaning in closer, lowering her voice into something sharp enough to cut. "This isn't your Senate hearing, Senator. You can't filibuster your way out of facts." Kennedy leaned in as well, not matching her hostility, but holding steady like an anchor. "No need to," he said softly, though the weight of his words silenced the entire room. The audience felt it deeply. This wasn't just a guest fielding hostile questions anymore. This was a man methodically taking apart his interrogator, one measured sentence at a time. And even Joy seemed to recognize just how badly she had miscalculated.
Joy's smile had vanished completely now. What she had planned as a bit of edgy, playful sparring had mutated into a real confrontation, one she was losing visibly and painfully. Her voice sharpened again, the irritation leaking through every word as strategy gave way to pure frustration. "You talk slow because you think it sounds wise," she snapped, her hands cutting impatiently through the air. "It doesn't. It sounds old." A ripple of discomfort moved through the crowd. A few people laughed awkwardly, but most exchanged uneasy glances. The tone had shifted. Joy wasn't challenging his politics anymore. She had dipped into personal insult, mocking the cadence of his speech in a way that felt pointed and cruel. It landed wrong, and everyone felt it.
Kennedy didn't react immediately. He didn't bristle, he didn't roll his eyes, didn't even blink. He simply looked at her, calm and unwavering, as though he was letting the echo of her words die in the room before responding. It was an unnerving patience, the quiet confidence of someone who had weathered far harsher storms. Then he leaned into the microphone, voice dropping low and even, the weight of 1,000 courtrooms and debate stages wrapped in his quiet southern drawl. "Down where I come from, ma'am," he said, each word slow and deliberate, like a velvet hammer. "We talk slow, so lies don't slip out. You might try it sometime." The studio erupted. Applause exploded from every corner, joined by whistles and shouts that rolled through the room like a breaking wave. It wasn't just approval, it was release, the sound of an audience recognizing the perfect counterpunch delivered without anger, without grandstanding, just devastating clarity. Joy's face flushed deep red. She forced a tight smile, but the strain around her eyes betrayed her completely. The cameras caught it all, the crack in her composure, the sting of realizing she had overplayed her hand live on air. Sarah rushed in, her voice high and uncertain. "All right, let's keep things civil, folks." But Kennedy wasn't quite done. His tone stayed gentle, almost kind, but the words carried more force than any shout could. "I didn't come here to sound smart," he said, turning deliberately from Joy to the main camera, addressing the viewers at home instead of the host across from him. "I came here to sound real, but I suppose that's offensive in a world addicted to pretending." The applause came again, longer this time, louder, filled with the unmistakable shift of an audience recalibrating their loyalties. They had arrived expecting Joy to dismantle another politician. Instead, they were watching a politician dismantle the entire approach being used against him. Joy's professional veneer cracked again. The studio lights felt harsher, the air heavier. For the first time in years, she looked not like the interrogator, but the one being interrogated. She straightened, summoning the last of her defiance. "You think being blunt makes you brave," she said, forcing a brittle laugh. "It just makes you reckless." Kennedy didn't respond right away. He lifted himself slightly in his chair, adjusting his posture with quiet intention, then fixed his gaze not on Joy, but on the camera again, on the millions watching. "Reckless," he repeated calmly, "is pretending you're brave behind a cue card. I speak without one." The studio erupted once more. Cheers, whistles, even a few people shouting, "That's it!" Even Whoopi raised her brows, half covering a grin she probably didn't want the camera to see. Joy blinked rapidly, stunned, then lunged for one last foothold. "You're just performing honesty," she shot back, the strain in her voice unmistakable. The room quieted. The audience sensed something final approaching. Kennedy didn't raise his voice. He didn't lean forward. He didn't change his expression. He simply spoke. "No, ma'am," he said softly, with an unshakable certainty. "I'm just not afraid to sound wrong in a world obsessed with sounding right." The silence that followed was absolute. A silence that swallowed the air, made the entire studio forget to breathe. A silence heavy with the kind of truth that doesn't need volume to land, just honesty. Joy opened her mouth, searching for a response. None came.
Nothing she might have said could neutralize what he had just delivered, an assertion so simple and so disarming that it cut deeper than any rehearsed retort. He had articulated with absolute clarity that authenticity mattered more than the performance of correctness, that being genuine outweighed sounding clever, that courage didn't lie in pretending to be infallible, but in accepting the possibility of being wrong. It was a truth too straightforward for her to spin.
Kennedy held her gaze for a beat longer before turning back to the audience. His expression didn't shift, but his presence filled the studio so completely that the energy seemed to tilt toward him. This wasn't just a comeback, it was checkmate, and the entire room recognized it. Joy sat frozen, the tension thick enough to feel on the skin. The air itself seemed to hesitate. The audience no longer needed cues, prompts, or lights. They were responding on instinct, reacting to the shock of witnessing something rare, genuine, unvarnished truth delivered without theatrics. Her trademark TV smile twitched at the corners, but it looked strained now, almost painful. A practiced expression, worn smooth over years of hosting, suddenly didn't fit her face anymore. The cue cards trembled in her hands, her fingers pressed so hard into the paper that it bent and creased under the pressure. She drew a breath, opened her mouth as if to regain control, but nothing came out. It wasn't that she didn't have words, it was that every possible line sounded too thin to stand against what she'd just been hit with. Nothing she could say would reclaim the ground she had lost. Kennedy didn't rush in to fill the silence. He didn't smirk, didn't gloat, didn't make any gesture that might dilute the weight of the moment. The quiet itself amplified him, made his point sharper than any volume could. When he finally leaned forward, his voice softened again, low, measured, devastatingly composed. He said, "You called me a joke, but a joke's only funny until it tells the truth." The line split the room in two. Gasps first, sharp, involuntary, then a rising wave of applause and cheers as the entire audience surged to their feet. It was chaos, real chaos, the kind that studio microphones aren't designed to handle. Someone in the back yelled, "Say it again!" and laughter rolled through the crowd like distant thunder. Joy blinked through it, still wearing a smile that no longer reached her eyes. Inside them, though, there it was, the unmistakable look of someone cornered, of someone unaccustomed to being exposed live on camera, pushed against a wall in the one place she always expected to be the one in control. Kennedy waited for the noise to die down. He didn't encourage it, didn't ride it, didn't even acknowledge it. When the room finally settled, he turned his head toward her again. His expression was almost gentle, almost sympathetic, as though he understood exactly how deeply the blow had landed. He said quietly, "In this room, Ms. Behar, I didn't out-talk you. You just ran out of things to believe." A hush fell instantly. Even the control room, usually a constant storm of commands and chatter, went silent. Producers leaned forward over their monitors, stunned by what they were watching. The camera zoomed in on Joy's face as the last remnants of her smile disappeared completely. Her jaw tightened, her eyes glistened slightly under the bright lights, not tears, but something perilously close. For several seconds, neither spoke. Joy's hands trembled as she set her creased cue cards on the desk. She forced herself to look up again, but the authority she usually carried was gone, completely gone. The audience picked up a chant, soft at first, then louder. "Kennedy! Kennedy! Kennedy!" The red studio light blinked to signal the end of the segment, but no one in the control room dared cut away. This was too raw, too unprecedented, too real. Kennedy leaned forward one final time. He said softly, "The thing about truth, ma'am, is that it doesn't need applause. It just needs the courage to be said." He sat back, folding his hands with calm finality. The studio erupted again, shouts, applause, phones raised to capture the moment, pure, unfiltered reaction. Joy remained seated, stunned, silent, and stripped of her usual command, searching for an escape, for a line, for something, anything, to salvage the moment. But the moment had already crowned its victor, and everyone knew it. Senator John Kennedy had walked straight into a trap and dismantled it piece by piece with nothing but composure, clarity, and the surprising power of speaking slowly enough for truth to catch up to everyone else.